Morning everybody, welcome to Art at Home and to my house. It's lovely to see so many of you and thank you for bearing with us, and never had a big long wait list before on Eventbrite, so I've learned how to use that. Some of you have been to Sunday salons before, some haven't, some are new. This is a very special one. We've got 4 speakers and this exhibition is also a new collaboration for us. So Paul Smith has curated and put this exhibition together. He's set the bar extremely high for me, so the next exhibitions will be quite different, and it's the first time that we've done a group show. So really delighted to be collaborating with Paul, and thank you very much for all your work on this. We are filming this morning, but we've just put a sign out, so anybody, you know, the camera's just there, so if you've got an issue with that,
it's just on me.
It's just on me, just to let you know. So I'm going to introduce you to Professor Ruth Livesey, who has written a text in the catalogue, which is an absolute bargain at £12. I'll be flogging those afterwards. And Ruth is going to facilitate the discussion this morning and introduce the artists. But welcome to everybody, particularly you guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Kath. So I just want to start out with a huge thanks to Kath and everything that New Art at Home brings to our local area in particular, and the sense that it's created this little space for us to get together and think about art and culture in Twickenham, which of course has a long, proud history of being a hub of those sorts of arts and ideas, but perhaps something we've taken our eye off locally for some time. But this is a really important national gathering of painters today, and I'm just going to have the pleasure of introducing that in a bit more detail. So many thanks to Kath and New Art at Home, but also thanks to contemporary British painters for their support for this exhibition and their ongoing facilitative support of the work of many of the artists in this show today as well. So I'm just going to start out by asking each of the 3 painters we have here with us today to introduce themselves, just very briefly, and then I'm going to talk a little bit contextually about the works we have in front of us, and then ask some questions of the 3 amazing artists we have here with us today. So just briefly, Paul, do you want to start by introducing yourself?
Yeah, Paul Smith curated the exhibition, as mentioned, originally from Sunderland, lived in Twickenham 20 years, and painting every day now, so that's good.
Juliette? I'm Juliette Losq. I'm also based in Twickenham, but for the past 10 years, I'm from London. I work on Ilkley Island, which, as you'll probably know, is over the river. I also lecture and teach.
I'm Narbi Price. I'm based in Gateshead. I teach at Newcastle University, and I'm the chair of Contemporary British Painting, and do a bit of curating and all of that kind of thing as well.
Great, thank you so much. And I should say, in my day job, when I get a chance, my subject is 19th century culture, which includes visual culture and art. And it's fascinating to me to see how these paintings both are part of, but put some questions back to a long tradition of painting and landscape. And I just want to start out by thinking a little bit about what landscape art is and what we see in these paintings here in relation to that. So, writing an introductory essay for the catalogue, we're just pushing this, you can hear that, can't you? £12 only, real bargain. You can learn much more about these guys, that's the most interesting bit. But there's also a couple of essays in there by myself and by Justin Hopper, a very thought-provoking writer. And John Ruskin, the 19th century art critic, says there is no landscape without the human. So we may think that what we're looking at here, we don't see figures there are hardly any figures apart from a couple of Gordon's works, Gordon Dalton's work on the wall here. There are no figures in these paintings. But Ruskin's point about landscape that stayed with me and resonated through this exhibition is landscape as a way of representing the world around us only exists because of and through the human. So even though there are no figures in here, these paintings are as they are because of 2 things. One thing is that landscape and cityscapes we see here have been made and forged by and for the human. We've got roads, paths, gates, perspectives, buildings, leftover and decaying architecture. The traces of the human and its interaction with the landscape are what brings the energy to the subject matter of so many of the works here. but also what makes us want to stay with these paintings. What is it that draws our eye in and makes us dwell with them and feel that moment of resonance? And that is, and I'm with Ruskin, I'm an old school romanticist in some ways, that's because we feel the feeling of the painter. We feel the feeling that there is that sense of, it's not an objective view, it's not a photograph, it's not looking through a window. This is replete with the emotional experience of a viewer who is showing us not just a view, but the sense of resonance of emotions that lie within that view, that their take on the histories and presence and the evocation of a long history of memories and what that place may mean in these paintings. So that's what makes us dwell with these. These are not just snapshots, these are not just views. This is about a concentration of the eye that evokes feeling. And so spending time in a space like this is absolutely crucial to take the time to make us pay attention in a world that is ever more distracting us and asking us to look away to the next thing. So give yourself that gift of attention today. Usually I want all eyes on the front because I'm an old school lecturer, but today I want all eyes on the side because we're here because of these works as we're here. So I'm just going to take us round and ask, start with, I've got 3 big prompts I'm going to ask each of our artists to think about and talk about in turn today. And I would say we are at a moment where I guess we feel landscape and the human relationship with the land is under threat and under pressure in perhaps unprecedented ways, I say, after 32 days of torrential rain in this place. So again, you know, that sense of the environmental question is also there, but none of these artists, I think, is doing anything straightforward or unthought through about this idea of an Anthropocene or a moment where the world has been changed by human action. These aren't anxious paintings, and that in itself I find quite fascinating in its own way. But I'm going to start really by, quite selfishly, asking these 3 amazing artists about a concept I've been thinking a lot in my own work over the last few years, which is what it means to try and depict the everyday as opposed to the picturesque or the aesthetically elevated or the sublime. There's something very middling and a deliberate play on ordinariness in some of these works. And I just wondered if we started out by thinking about that question of subject matter and what it means to paint something that is perhaps deliberately unsublime and majestic and is perhaps sitting in that language of the ordinary, the everyday, the middling kind of experience of life. And Paul, you know, feel free to talk about what you see connects these works as well when we come to you, because since as curator, I'm sure people would like to hear that too.
Sure.
So yeah, maybe that subject matter of the everydayness and
Yeah, I guess I could start on this one and then you guys just join in whenever you want. But for when I'm working, most of my work's made by photographs. I take photographs when I'm out walking. I'm not looking for, what am I looking for? I never really know what I'm looking for. I'm walking to get somewhere to do something, but I'm always taking images wherever I go. So whether I capture something on that walk or not, it's not deliberate. It's kind of like, that's interesting, but I'm not thinking of it as a painting. So it's not, so if I see an interesting gate or a building or something that appeals to me, it's not, in my mind, I'm not saying this will make a really nice painting that talks about the past and the future and everything in between. It's. I think I can paint it. I think I can do something with it when I review it later, having a cup of coffee or whatever. I could possibly use that. But there's no plan for how it's going to fit into a body of work or where it's going to go. Sometimes you do bodies of work, perhaps like what Narbi's done recently, where it's a very specific space and you are deliberately walking to find those spaces or find a relationship with those spaces to what your current topic is, that, so in a way. And if I'm doing my pool paintings, tennis court paintings, it's quite straightforward to tennis courts are just there. I can go and have a walk around and take a few snaps and avoid the people, which I seem to mention a lot in my essay. But yeah, so how do you go about yours?
So for an extra bit of context, the 3 works that I've got in here are a sort of offshoot of a big project that I've been doing over the last couple of years called Going Back Brockens. And the title of the work comes from Pitmatic, the dialect that pitmen miners used to use underground. It means coming back broken, so going back broken. It refers to a book written by a guy called Mark Hudson called Coming Back Brockens. and it's a technique that was used in mining, whereby they would pull out the pit props and collapse the seam when it was exhausted. In this larger exhibition, we revisited that book, which really appealed to me because it was a really unvarnished truth of a working class experience. It wasn't nostalgic, it wasn't kind of wholesome, hardy working class lads. It was the grittiness, and it really kind of resonated with my own upbringing. Anyway, so it ended up being 43 paintings that were sites of the 14 mines that were still active in County Durham at the beginning of the miners' strike. And the titles of all the paintings are taken from interviews that Mark did for this book. So these are 3 paintings that are additional to that body of work. So they show sites in County Durham sites that were important in the mining community. You've got a sort of over there on that wall, one with the triangle, that is an old Methodist chapel. That one over there that says Market Hall is a market hall. And the one on the back wall, the seascape, the grey seascape, that is from Horden Colliery, which is between Hartlepool and Sunderland. And it's there are 8 miles of tunnels that go out underneath the North Sea. So you were travelling sort of, after you got to the bottom of the shaft, you were travelling 8 miles before you got to work when you started getting paid. So there was so that is, I'm visiting these places for very specific reasons, but the way that I deal with it as a painter is got a whole different set of criteria and a whole different set of concerns. So I'm thinking about how to make these paintings that are of pretty kind of scuzzy things in some ways, how to make them as engaging as possible. So sort of turn things on the head using hypersaturated colour, and bringing all of that kind of weight of association of of visual sensibility of growing up in the in the late 19th century, late 20th century.
You're not that old now.
No, I feel it today. But yeah, I think the everydayness is something that I personally try to play with, because it is a sort of, I want them to be quite everyday and accessible sort of images, but I want to paint them in a way that is sort of slightly fantastical, I guess.
Yeah, and I love it. I suppose there's such a long tradition of documenting social realism, anything that's working class in black and white, in monochrome, and I do think that the super saturation of colour and not dissimilar to Mandy Payne's amazing brutalist paintings of brutalist buildings here. We think of brutalist architecture in the cityscape, and we think greyness, but actually Mandy's work are full of that hypersaturation, which obviously is part of your painting of abandonment as well, but abandonment as hypersaturation. Juliette, I suppose with your work, I'm fascinated by the physicality of them. That in a way, here we've got the tumble down, rusted sheds around the back of the allotments, or wherever it is, but they're demanding our attention by kind of leaning in, aren't they?
So actually they are. I'll tell you what they are. They are mangled train carriages from a freight train wreck in Canada.
Oh.
So they're not that everyday for us, but they're everyday for people that do the walk around that. And it's been there for obviously a very long time, and it's now been sort of repurposed as a graffiti canvas. But I think probably from what you were saying and backtracking to when you sort of introduced this subheading, I would say that my work does very much fit in within the tradition of the picturesque in many ways, and I think we've all got a sort of a weight of history of landscape painting that we cannot help but be influenced by, and for me, I guess my work is almost reclaiming the picturesque as the opposite of the sublime. So I'm very much drawn to these kind of non-open spaces, spaces with a lot of crumbling detail, foliage. I think in line with some of the other painters in this, I very much use framing devices. I like the idea of the coulis or the flat. But how do you reclaim the picturesque? How do you make it contemporary? I think that's the question that I kind of ask through my work. So subject matter is ruins, which is in common with picturesque, and foliage, which is in common with picturesque. But again, I think it's probably through experimenting with scale, using very traditional media because it's watercolour, but often working on a very large scale or sculpturally, as I'm doing here. But I guess I sort of would see myself as fitting in within the picturesque tradition.
No, and it's fascinating, you know, looking at Paul's, you know, tumble down barn over there. I think it's the 19th century novel. Jane Austen is full of people trying to learn how to do nice ladylike watercolours of tumble down buildings. You know, so there is that long tradition of the
I think it's the lowest of the paint medium. So you know, for me, I kind of see that as a bit of a challenge. What can I do with it to elevate it, to make it challenging? Challenging myself as well. So a lot of the work I do is as I say, very large scale or walk through ruins.
Absolutely.
So you sort of walk into the painting.
Yeah. I mean, I was lucky to see your work in the summer exhibition at the RA this summer, and it was on a plinth, wasn't it? There?
Yes.
And that was extraordinary to walk around a kind of three-dimensional kind of encounter with this form, and I think that seems so important.
I just think as well as the picturesque was all about framing. But how do you see? Because I feel framing very constraining, and yet I'm drawn to it. You know, I'm kind of thinking about how do I frame a scene, but how do I then sort of escape from that frame? I guess.
Yeah, and in the catalogue, I was thinking a lot about Jo Whittle's work here. We've got the little proscenium arches and frames and follies, and again that kind of deliberate harking back to the constructed ruin that we still see of. I mean, all around Twickenham, you get little fake little temples on hills, and the sense of an attempt to focus the eye in the landscape in that framing device, and it's great. It's fascinating to see how Jo plays with that inherited tradition of the fakery of trying to frame it, but also that is the way it trains the eye to see a landscape in a particular way.
And I think if I was being really academic about it, I could probably trace most of the paintings in the room to being either a sort of descendant of the sublime or a descendant of the picturesque. They're sort of in two camps. And some people are kind of doing both. But I think for me, a lot of my practice is about looking at art history and thinking about, you know, we can't avoid it. We're all influenced by it. Nothing is new, really. But you know, how do you use it to sort of progress?
And I think it's bringing these works together. It's only when you bring the work of a really significant generational shift, I think, in people coming back to thinking about the history of how people have engaged with landscape and how that shaped the actual landscapes we live in, but how it's reshaping the human as well. And I think that is the powerful nature of the very different responses we see in this room, is giving that moment to think, okay, so when we go out here, what is this telling us about what we want from landscape, what we expect from landscape, how we've made and changed landscape over the last 200 years. Juliette, you touched on scale there in the end, and that again is something that I find really interesting about, you know, these are deliberately small works, Paul. I mean, was that part of your selection process? Looking for small works, and what was behind that, other than fitting them on the wall, which we joked about?
Well, size of space is one thing, but small works deliberately, and then I can have more of the artists that I love in the show as well. So there's two personal things there, but there is something about, I paint both large and small, and I find smaller paintings harder to do than larger ones, because we were talking a bit about this yesterday, that if you make a mistake on a big painting, you can go back and you can correct that little area and work around it and so forth. Little paintings, the whole thing's trashed. You can't. I have to scrape it back. So there is something much more intense about a little picture to me, especially with Jo's work and even Lara's work. The errors stand out. Mistakes have to be adapted and incorporated into it. And at this scale, the intensity is something else, you know. And this is small for you, isn't it? Really.
It's quite,
and you can go quite big too. So but there's something about these smaller pieces, the way they slot together. You can tell a more coherent narrative between them. So say I'd only had 8 pieces in here, one a feature. I don't think you'd get the same flow, the same movement. I don't think the language would be the same.
That's really interesting. Yeah. But there's something about attentiveness, both to the act of painting, but also I guess to the demand on the viewer. Is that something to do with scale as well, and you know, when you paint smalls, paint big Narbi. Is any?
I mean, there's a different physicality, isn't there? Small works necessarily draw the viewer in. You know, I think it's something that artists do quite a lot actually. When you go around an exhibition, you can spot the artists because they're the ones up there. Or looking around the edge.
Yeah.
And the first thing I did when I came in here was, how did that get? How is it hung? You know, and I think process is something that is. There are all sorts of different things that come into the making of a work, and process is one of them. And scale changes how you approach the process of making work. And there's that sort of difference between scale and size. The size of the marks in relation to the size of the support and all of those kind of things. And I'm just talking about this painting because I can see it in my eye line, but I remember when I was painting that one, thinking about just putting these, the red and the blue, and putting them in with a brush that was far bigger than it needed to be, so that they were those marks were made with a brush that was maybe about 2.5 inches, and it's just like a load of paint on the brush, and they're put in very lightly and very definitely. That same mark on a larger painting would be an entirely different gesture, and though it would have to be much bigger to have that same resonance that it does. So it changes the physicality for the viewer, and it changes the physicality for the maker as well, and it makes you think in a different way. I think.
And I think for me, as Paul rightly says, that is on the smaller side of my work, but whatever the size of the work, the entire surface is made up of marks with my work. It's reductive painting, so it's watercolour. You can't actually make a mistake, because if you do, you just can't continue because you can't remove it. So I work in a process that's inspired by etching. So I build up the surface in layers. A lot of people do think that I've cheated and it is a print which I've painted over and I get that wrong.
That didn't happen last week.
However, it's not. It's built up the lightest layer, which is the raw paper, over several. It's an insane process that I sort of. I'm going to say I patented it. I invented it when I was like on my BA, and I basically had an etching course, and I just thought, well, why can't I just do that as a painting? And it just got more and more complex over the years until I'm now, it just gets more and more detailed. So I think with the smaller work, as Narbi rightly said, the detail draws you in. And I think if we think of all of these as windows onto worlds, the sort of historical trick was, how do I draw the viewer into my little world? And if you sort of think of 19th century optical devices where you sort of peer into them, they have little landscapes in them, they are just a sort of three-dimensional version of what painters do.
We just do it without thinking, really.
Yes.
And now I can only see this as a 19th century stereoscope, which I want to step inside.
Oh, that's a good idea. It's a good idea for another painting.
You've done that sort of thing before, haven't you? Where you have layers that you sort of step into.
Yeah, I've done the layered thing you step into, but I have thought about doing a stereoscopic image. I think it'd be pretty tricky, but maybe that's something.
You know, Brian May's got the world class stereoscope.
Yeah.
And anyway, there's money in this. There's a patron for you somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's got lots of hair.
Really fascinating. And Paul, what about scaling?
Scale, there's, going back to the small and the big thing, scaling up, and you mentioned that, is a totally different process to working on the small, because you're not scaling up at all, you're almost redacting and reducing to squeeze in all the information that you want into 8x10 or whatever. Scaling up, you're gridding out and you're drawing it, and then you're changing it as you go along. So you've got your source imagery that you're working from, in my case, and then you're working it out as you're going along, because it looks fine there, but you know it's not necessarily, that top right hand corner is not going to necessarily work at that scale. So you bring, it's a different way of painting, then the bigger brushes come out and so forth, and your block colouring and everything. Smaller, it's just not the same. You are, I don't know, you're just cramming so much information into that space. But it's the same information that you would
Yeah.
you could have
I mean,
on
because we've taken the
Yeah.
swimming pool one here, which hopefully people can see. It's a bit far from the back, but I mean that is. You've done much larger versions of similar
Mhm.
subject matter. But is that similar kind of colour intensity and everything? You know, yeah, it's just.
Yeah, in the process of that one, because a lot of my paintings start with bright colours, so I'll do
Yeah.
with an orange or a pink or something like that, because I'm working in colder colours, the greens and the blues. When I work back and I scrape back the images or play around with it a bit, those lighter, brighter colours come through and add the warmth back in. And to be honest, the orange coming through is a bit of a happy accident, really, because I was removing an area I didn't like. You know, actually, now it's doing what I wanted to do. I just didn't realise that's how it's going to happen. But I guess comes with practice, that you don't even think about it again. Like the whole composition, we've been doing it so long, we don't really plan it. That if I take something back, it isn't the end of the picture. It's a rebuilding and it's a restructuring of the picture. And that one didn't take much to get back on terms of what I was wanting to do. You know, it's
Sort of taking away as well as
taking away to
giving.
put back in. Yeah.
And that takes me on to something we were talking about this morning. I'm very fortunate to have a house guest this morning, so we were talking about this over breakfast, which is painterliness.
Mm.
And where are we with painterliness as a phrase, as a concept? I mean, contemporary British painting, you know, there was a lot. It seems that this is a really interesting group of people for whom the paint really matters. I mean, you know, it'd be a bit bizarre to be an artist and for the paint not to matter, but that sense of in that generational shift of artistic fashions and everything else, it felt at the summer show as well that there's a kind of acceptant joy in the craft of painterliness now that's not been as easy to talk about or as broadly well received. I may be totally wrong, it's totally not, but interesting to hear in Narbi, you know, because we started touching on this morning, and the importance of the form and the
it feels like you know, painting has never really died. You know, there's that thing that, you know, that has been going on since photography was invented. It's just reformed itself. I think it's a really good time for painting now at the minute, and just looking at the diversity of approaches in you know, smooshing around this strange stuff, and how we all do it in very different ways, and how we're all, you know, we're thinking through painting is what we're doing, and we're trying to make you know, even if we all had the same source imagery and we all tried to paint exactly the same thing in exactly the same way, we wouldn't be able to do it, because we can't, you know. I think even if as artists we try to do the same thing twice, we can't. We're forever sort of trying to, it's like grabbing the soap in the bath, you know, it's always getting away from you. And occasionally you get it, and occasionally it hits. And a lot of my approach personally to making paintings and making representational paintings comes from a sort of a frustration with how painting was talked about. So how representational painting was talked about. I remember at uni during my BA, when in crits people would talk about, when talking about abstract work, they talk about gesture and form, and they talk about formalism, they talk about all of the kind of stuff. And then when you had a representational painting, they would talk about what the painting was of. And
content
that
over
really
form.
got on my tits.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And it still does. So a lot of the way that I make paintings is trying to use the paint in such a way where it functions on its own terms and how it can evoke all of those same conversations. So I use a lot of indirect painting techniques. Do
you want to explain what those are? Just
so indirect painting is sort of using transparent paint essentially, and using paint where a colour might be mixed through layers rather than directly mixed on the palette. So that one again, a lot of the sky on that was a transparent grey colour, and that's below the whole thing. and a lot of the red of the building, again very, very transparent, but then you've got bits of absolute opacity, so like it's white straight from the tube in the clouds. That's kind of the highest note you can achieve, so you've got to use it very, very sensitively. You know, you can't get anything brighter than that bit. And then the red is again probably something like Peroline red straight from the tube. The blue is probably cobalt chromite or something straight from the tube. And I like to really play up that sort of thing. How can I do things in a way where the paint might do as much to disrupt the illusion as to acknowledge it?
And it's really, I mean, there's a fascinating, I'm going to put myself in here, but there's a, you know, working on 19th century literature, there's a whole way in which the realist novel, you know, you take, you know, Thomas Hardy or you Georgette, is somehow seen as less interesting or less innovative because it's just showing the world like it is. And in fact, if you scratch the surface, I mean, in your case, literally, but in a written text the same, there is as much craft and disruption and artistic thought into what happens in a form that's showing the world as it is, if you see what I mean, as opposed to one that is abstracted or experimental or deliberately moving away from anything that's like a mirror to reality. So that's really fascinating. And Juliette, you were touching on etching there, which I found fascinating because again, that's such a step away from that. But in the watercolour tradition,
it's
so
very
hard.
sort of non-painterly. So in many ways, the work is non-painterly because it is very much based on mark making. But in other ways, to use the colour and to get the colours as I want them to be, you have to learn what happens if you mix a sort of a violet with a olive green or a yellow. And thinking about what you've just said about 19th century literature, and thinking about the pre-Raphaelites, for example, who are also sort of now not necessarily considered in the most positive light and weren't for many years. But if you look at the way that they create a landscape, it's actually all about colour mixing. Colour mixing on the canvas. And they did that with watercolour as well. So that is something that I've kind of looked at and thought about. Very much the painterliness of these works comes in the sort of construction of them and the combination of colours, which is done on the surface, so sort of one layer followed by another layer followed by another layer, so in a different way to the way that Narbi's been describing, and it does involve quite a lot of planning. So in that sense, it's not, I don't have that kind of happy accident that you've been describing, but it's trial and error, I guess. So that's the sort of thinking through making.
And I think that's a brilliant, you know, that sense of this is material thinking, as you know, this is thinking through form. This is thinking through the physicality of the act, and that's again something that connects these works. I mean, just in terms of technique, you know, I'm loving the conversation that Paul set up across this wall in particular, because it seems almost as if, again, consciously or not, the similarity of shape and size, let's put it that way, and the absolute contrast of paint of technique in each one. You know, from yours, Paul, we just heard about that thinness and that scraping away, to Mandy's, where just the kind of the level of detail and clarity and flatness, and I don't know if that one's on concrete or not, is that one, or, you know, it's and then we've got Gordon Dalton's incredibly free kind of, I always think of as a kind of a kind of luminous treasure map, and then Lara's kind of reduced that seascape, reduced to the level almost of interference or information, or you know, abstract, you know, almost like zeros and ones kind of abstraction of colour. And then Hannah's very free, seemingly very free painting, and so it just the kind of the flow of contrast of technique there actually, whilst there is just that strong continuity of attentiveness and scale is really fascinating to me. But Paul, I mean, do you want to come around to that question of?
Well, I mean, in terms of the hang, well, in terms of the hang, there is a sort of kind of horizon that runs through it. So when I was hanging them, if I was hanging them all at the same level and everything at eye level, it gets they get more competitive with each other. And you're looking at each one as an individual item. If there's slightly spaced, some slightly more paired up, and you break them up, and some are on a proper horizon line and some are just dropped off. And with Narbi's one, I pushed them up a bit because it's sort of, you are looking up. It's so true. In a balanced demand is next to it, where you're kind of walking through it. So it's like, it felt like a little bit left and forward and all of that. But in terms of paintiness, obviously I wasn't going to put the same artists together twice. They have to bounce off each other. But you're looking not just at painting this, you're also looking at shapes and movement within it. So when I was looking at putting mine in the corner, and it was, I inadvertently looked at mine and didn't realise there was the rectangles going on in it. So I've got a flat rectangle pool thing, and she's got the windows, and then it was moving along like that, and then as soon as, if it didn't feel like it was, have to rejig it. And then with Mandy's, once it's hung up, you're not getting it down, so everything has to.
It is a piece of concrete, if you didn't know. So once it drills out, it's
that's it. So whatever happened, she
yeah.
was staying put. Yeah, it's a big lump of concrete in the landscape. But it in terms of, I mean, you know, with Gordon's, we were talking about what goes on in the paint and stuff the other day. I jokingly said to him, in last week's talk, we talked about how about how painters do things differently, and I joked to him and says, I feel like there's a lot of vim in your paint, and he went, there's no vim, but there's plenty of bleach in it, and he bleaches a lot, he scrapes it back and bleaches the canvas down, and his paintings, in contrast to Mandy's, are featherweight. There's nothing, it's almost, and again, Narbi, we joked about this, I like joking about Gordon, he's a lovely lad, but the wood and he stretches as the crappiest and thinnest wood possible. He doesn't care about the construction. Yeah, it's just the paint that matters to him. It's just the story he's trying to tell. He's an extraordinary painter, lovely bloke. And when I saw Lara Davies' work in the studio, and she had a whole wall of stuff, and she has a gallery, so she has to be a bit careful what she releases and what have you. And I said, so what can I have? And she said, oh, anything on this wall, they haven't been around for ages. So it's like, okay, brilliant, exciting. And,
this is being recorded, Paul.
Yeah, I know. But it was like, I was just drawn to these seascapes. So the first one that I was really, really drawn to is the one with the sunset. And I'm assuming it's the sunset on the very, very back wall over there, on which she's made with her, I've deviated a bit from what we're talking about, but she's made from an offcut of another painting. So it's got this natural, or a band that she'd already painted on has now turned into the horizon, has turned into the sunset, and it's just a wonderful process she's gone through. And she didn't really see it like that in the process. She wanted to paint sunsets just for sunset's sake, and it was like in your essay talking about Oscar Wilde and all that. And
no, sunsets didn't exist before
Yeah.
Turner. Yeah, that's Oscar Wilde,
Yeah.
obviously, whatever it is. You know, nobody looked at sunsets, so they didn't exist before Ruskin started telling us to look at. Turner painted them, then Ruskin started telling us that sunsets were the best thing to have. And but sunsets are very out of fashion now, apparently, according to Oscar Wilde. So we've had a little while since then.
Yeah.
But again, it's that sense of being unafraid to return. And I think absolutely Juliette's reference to how the pre-Raphaelites became deeply unfashionable for so long as well. But I think the return to colour is so crucial here, in that sense of elevating what we have right in front of us. But that's a lovely description of the hang, and you're making me see this whole room as in itself kind of an immersive experience, as going to an exhibition should be.
You kind of have an idea what you're going to do with it, because I've been building this up for nearly a year towards this, and I'm getting the work as I go along. Lara's was the first, and Narbi had to bash some stuff out. Not quite bash it out. But I was like, all right, I'm waiting for you. I'm going to have to wait for Joe's, because she had a big project on. And you're just building up, and then it's not until you actually get in the space with all the work lined up, you realise what you've got. I thought I knew what I had because I've done the catalogue and I've built it up, and I've got a layout, really important. My whole plan was I'm going to try and set it out like the catalogue, that any artist that's paired opposite another in an image, that's how they're going to hang on the wall. And I think the only one that's done that is Narbi's and Mandy's on that wall, and that's exactly where I started. And that's pretty much where that end.
Again, the colour and the angle
as well.
Yeah.
Because I was just bouncing shapes off each other.
Yeah.
Which refers again back to these two over here. And it was a kind of a straightforward hang, and then we're waiting for your work at the end, because I started on this. It's not your fault, mine. And but this space was just made for you. It's perfect. When I remeasured them, it has to go there. It has to go there.
Yeah.
So you don't really know what you've got until it's landed, and then this is, as you see it now, and it didn't require any changes. It didn't
Yeah.
much adjustment.
But I think it's kind of absolutely upholding the idea of a group show or a collective exhibition like this, that, you know, what I learn about Gordon and about Hannah's work by the two of them being paired behind us there. If anyone was here last Friday, you realise we're all having far too good a time to actually look at the paintings. So this is hence why I'm back here today to look. But that kind of conversation is, I see so much more from both of them as painters. It's really fascinating. So, are there any last comments anyone wants to make? Because I think we've got time, just probably, hopefully, I'm looking for Kath to give me a nod here, but a couple of questions maybe as well. If you do that in your salons, I don't want to break the form. But any last comments anyone wants to add about?
I'd say thanks to Paul for organising all this and all the hard work you've put in, and for the catalogue, which is fantastic.
And we'll choose that catalogue.
It's a mere £12.
And you can get them signed by the artists.
Oh,
by the
yeah, we
so
can
I've
sign
got
it
a pen and everything.
Take the exhibition home with you, that's my other line.
But I wanted to thank the contributing writers, especially because your essay gave me a lot of food for thought. Sort of after the process of putting this together, so, oh, that's what it's about. Almost, not quite.
Thank you,
Not quite, not true.
No.
But it took me so long to write the foreword, which is way less than what you wrote and Justin wrote, and
well,
it's all that. I'm not a writer, I'm a painter at the end of the day, so
I think
it's different perspectives.
So it's nice to know that after 25 years there's been some impact. So yeah, thank you so much to all three of you. That's really interesting insight, and we've got I'd say about 10-15 minutes for questions. So please ask away, take your chance. Do you want to, yes, just
no, well, first, congratulations, amazing show. Really, really good. I've got loads of questions, all good, but Juliette, the distortion on the substrate, well, could you talk more about that?
Yes, so it's paper, so it's laminated paper, so it's been moulded over a shape. And
I got that bit right last week.
You did, but I have to thank Dave, who's sitting at the back of the room with the dog hiding, because he is the person that helps me with the moulding of the shape. So you basically paint the picture first, and then I'm experimenting with different ways of turning them into sculptural forms, and with the help of Dave, who's a furniture maker. So he's got the kind of nous and machinery.
But rather the practicality of it, that's sort of the reason why. I mean, I think I like the thing Narbi was talking about, that kind of the way that you want to undermine, if you like, the depiction and you know, the thing, you know, what it emphasises, I suppose, the thingness of it and the objectness of it, and it's that sort of thing that I'm interested in, I suppose.
I am sort of interested in this idea, as I said, about how to break out of a frame, and how at what point does something become an object. So I'm looking at this little painting here by Lara, and it's so chunky, it almost feels like it's an object. So you know, that's something that interests me, and I'm sort of experimenting with that on several different scales. So
I mean, I got a bit obsessed by what kind of paper you're using as well, because of the sense that paper itself is a product of the wood pulp and the natural environment.
Yeah, when you were writing about it, you're going like, how did you make it?
So it's watercolour paper, very thick watercolour paper, sort of 300. This is not going to mean anything to anyone that's not a painter, but 300 GSM is kind of one of the thickest grades of paper that you can get, and I use a sort of smooth surface because, as I say, it's all about mark making and sort of detail and but at the same time watercolour paper will absorb layers of paint. So the process of forming it and moulding it will flatten the picture out, so you're not going to get kind of undulations in the paper, and then you can kind of shape it into whatever form you want it to.
I'm always super interested in how the 19th century, as the physical stuff that made paper changed, that you can see there's a kind of consciousness of the actual stuff you're writing on or painting on, you know, from cotton to rag, and where's that cotton come from, and who's been picking the cotton, and you know, there's all kinds of interesting stuff going on.
I did a residency at it was Double Elephant Print Workshop and Positive Light Project in Exeter, which was all about paper making.
Oh wow!
Which kind of led into this series of works, and it was all about the rag pickers, and then where it then ended up, and how that was then moulded into paper, and how that then, the value of the paper kind of was directly correlated with what it was used for.
Absolutely.
And as you say, sort of like writing money, for example, or contracts. But yeah.
This is the reason to read Charles Dickens's Our Mutual Friend, by the way,
Right.
which has a whole thing about paper and rags. But anyway, that's really fascinating. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Oh yes, yeah.
We've got a whole new. Any other questions or comments, or any of the works in the room? Maybe if anyone wants to hear any more about any of them. Yes, at the back.
I'm interested to know about your studio spaces because I'm really nosy.
Well, I've got open studios coming up in May, and the main one's down in Kingston. I have a little one at home.
Your natural light and whether you're in a group with lots of other artists.
Yeah,
Just
it's
to kind of get a sense of your making space, please.
I'm in a studio complex in Kingston on Hawks Road. There's about 50 studios there. All sorts of different people doing different things. You've got paper sculptors, you've got loads of ceramicists, a few painters and so on. And it's kind of people come and go all the time, furniture makers, all sorts of things. So it's quite a busy space, not necessarily noisy, but there's plenty of comes and goes. But most people keep themselves to themselves and don't really.
It's got natural light in there.
It's natural light. It's cold. It's damp.
It's a studio, right?
It's a studio, yeah.
But it's big. It's big, isn't it? I mean, you've got enough space to see your works
Yeah.
and stand back from them and hang them
Yeah,
and dry
yeah.
and have many on the go at the same time. I think that's that kind of quality.
And you also work from home? Or
Yeah, I've got a little backup one at home for when things go wrong. So I do take work home to test out. I've got a space where I hang stuff there to let it finish off drying, and then I sort of sign it off and photograph it there. But so I have a mini studio there. I can do a few little bits and pieces and finish. If there's a little area I don't like, I can just touch it up and let it be. It should be all right. But your studio is really small, isn't it, for
It
you?
is small. I
It
guess
doesn't what I expected at all.
it's not as wide as this room, and it's probably about from it's. I can't do feet, but it's basically I've got one very tall wall which I can make large work on. But you could say that the reason why I'm kind of not making big sublime landscapes is because I don't have a lot of room to stand back. And when I make sculptural installations, I make them in sections from little models, so I can still make big things, but I kind of have to assemble them on site. And it's the first studio. Well, before I moved to this area, I didn't ever have natural light. I've always been in London. I've always been in the middle of a factory conversion or whatever, where there's sort of very few of the studios have a window at person level. If you've got a window, it's going to be way high up. So where I am, again, it's Eel Pie Island's very much a little eclectic bunch of studios. None of them are very big. Lots of ceramicists again, and kind of a few painters. There is a little community there. There is a garden. You can kind of sit and have a cup of tea with people. But to be honest, wherever I've had a studio, I've found that I'm in working on my own for the majority of the time. You don't see people unless you make an arrangement to see people. So,
and that's quite a joy, though, isn't it? To be able to, if you choose to see people, you could have a cup of tea. But my guess is certainly you don't often. The choice is not to see people.
You're there. You're
there. What about you, Narbi? Where do you?
I work in an 19th century old biscuit factory in Newcastle called the Biscuit Factory, and it's a sort of. It's not a gallery upstairs, it's a shop that sells artwork upstairs. If you want, it's very much kind of getting something to go in the curtains sort of place. But downstairs in the basement is a bunch of different types of practitioners, painters, jewellery makers, wedding photographer, that kind of thing. My space is probably about maybe 3 times the size of this room, quite high ceilings. But it's in the basement, and it does have some natural light, but it's like a light well for the car park. So the view is just this sort of like dirty white wall, which feeds into the light.
Sounds about right.
Whilst there are other practitioners there, once the door closes, you could go weeks without seeing anyone. And even when you open the door, like the lights go out, and then there's a motion sensor, so there's this like pregnant pause while it sort of flickers back on. It gets a bit creepy at times. But I've been there maybe 5 years or something.
Yeah, but there is certainly in our studios, there is a sense of community, even if you don't see anybody. The WhatsApp group's quite an annoying thing at times, but actually the information you can get out of it, does anybody know a man with a van and all that sort of stuff, it's useful.
I mean, it's the infrastructure, isn't it? I think, and we were talking about this last night. I mean, there still is this popular misconception of artists as I mean, there are plenty in the room, so you know this is just rubbish, but you know, it's kind of these wavy, hand-wafty idealists who just occupy some higher plane, but every single artist I've met is the most entrepreneurial, you know, focused, you know, make sure that they have either really good practical skills themselves or live with someone with practical skills who can do that stuff. You know, and I think there is that sense that you have to know how to stretch your canvases, how to mix your paints, how to get the various kinds of machinery you need to work, and I think it's incredibly important when helping young people think about careers and skills and educationalists that we really bring that front and centre, that actually artistic practice is an incredibly resilient set of skills and ways of encountering the world that we need people to hold.
And beyond the practical, self-promotion, publicity.
Yeah, I mean,
travelling across the country to open.
Well, I mean, the skills involved in liaising with all the people to bring this together. So, I mean, there is an infrastructure that we would be wrong to overlook in these studios. So it's a really helpful question about the studios, that we need that kind of infrastructure to still be in our towns and cities for this kind of work to thrive.
I think of all of the ones that have been described, Ilkley Island has the least infrastructure. It is very
it's quite loose.
Sheds.
It's quite a loose place. So it's a boatyard, it's a working boatyard, and the studios are sort of permitted to be within that working boatyard, but you very much just do your own thing. It's not. There's an open studios once a year, which you can take part in, but it's not the same. There's not the same sense of community as you get in these organised.
Yeah. Charity-led kind of things.
Charity-led.
Yeah, because that's ASC is a charity, isn't it, that runs those studios and has them all over London.
Allegedly.
Yeah. It's still good friend. Any final questions or comments? Maybe time for just one more before we move to the all-important chat over biscuits.
Yeah.
Are we all good? Well, I just want to absolutely reiterate my thanks, to Kath for hosting this, making it all possible, to Paul for putting the exhibition together, and to Contemporary British Painters for their support of the exhibition, but to Narbi and Juliette and all of the artists we've got in the room with us today, many of them who were here last week. But for you, for turning up on actually it might have stopped raining, turning up on a truly horrendous morning to listen to this and share your questions. So
thank you so much to Ruth, and there's loads more coffee.
Yeah.
Thank you.